Good afternoon. I just wanted everybody to know we're going to launch a real quick poll here. So if you would be so kind as to do this while I read our housekeeping for the day, I'd appreciate it. So, my name is Billy Zadig, APA Standards and Codes Administrator for APA. Allow me to review a couple of housekeeping items before we get started. All attendees are in listen-only mode. Please type your questions in the chat box and they will be answered in the order they are received. If we run out of time and we still have questions, responses will be sent directly to the person asking the question by one of our presenters. Professional continuing education, ISDs, PDHs, AIA-CLU credits are being offered. For AIA certificates, please send an email to billy@APA with your membership number if you have not done so before. If you did not indicate you wanted your certificate registration, just send me an email. Our webinar recording will be posted on the APA webpage later this afternoon. Additionally, you will receive a follow-up email within 72 hours providing a designated link to all webinar and town hall recordings. Those eligible for continuing education certificates will also receive them within 72 hours after the webinar ends. At this time, it's my pleasure to turn this over to Alex and Meredith. Meredith, take it away.
Thanks, Billy, and welcome everyone. We are delighted that you are joining us today for this webinar on working together but apart, running effective virtual meetings. I suspect that we've got lots of people joining us from across the country. Billy, where are we seeing people from?
We have 61% from the East Coast, 26% from the Central region, 5% from Rocky Mountain, and 7% from the West Coast.
Great. Well, welcome everyone. We appreciate you being here. We see, so my name is Meredith Hargraves, and my colleague Alex Gururajan and I are here to offer this presentation today. Say hi, Alex.
Hello, everyone.
We hope you'll find these next 60 minutes of valuable use of time. Some of the things we're going to be talking to you about today may be things that you are already doing, but we hope you leave here with some new nuggets of information and tools that you can take back to your daily work. As you all know, we're working in a very unusual time, a new normal. We realize that some of your workforce is working remotely while others are still out in spaces operating and maintaining our important campuses across the country. So please stay with us throughout this call. We do have several polls that we hope you'll contribute to and look forward to your responses. So before we get started, I want to just take a really brief moment to thank you and all the critical facilities professionals out there, particularly our essential workers. We need these physical spaces to operate, and without this critical work, we would be at a loss. So facilities has taken a strong leadership role in this crisis and adjusting to the unexpected. So big thank you. For those of you who would like it, this course is course eligible for 1 AIA credit. So here's why we're here. We're all adjusting to this new way of working. In this 1-hour session, we'll cover how to effectively prepare and run virtual meetings. We'll also offer some tips and recommendations to both leaders and participants for these types of sessions. Alex and I have been working with higher education and facilities to bridge this journey from non-remote to remote work. We've been doing this enough to learn a few good lessons here and there through our own ups and downs and our own mistakes. And both of us have been doing work both remotely and in person for more than 15 years. And so we've learned a lot about how to make this work. So this session is largely about processes and behaviors. So we're going to touch on some of the technology, but we're not going to focus in detail on the technical aspects. In the preparation section, we're going to be talking about some of the common challenges that we encounter and ways to overcome those challenges, particularly for those who are not as accustomed to running these types of meetings. In the leading section, Alex will share some tips around ground rules, ideal behaviors, ways to help you fulfill the purpose of your virtual meeting, and ways to ensure that everyone feels engaged and included. Lastly, we'll talk about how to participate effectively in these meetings so that your voice is heard, you're able to demonstrate and respect each other in virtual meetings, and importantly, truly able to understand and contribute to the purpose. So let's start off with a quick poll. What are your biggest challenges with virtual meetings?
The poll is now open. I'm going to close our poll.
Great, Billy. So what are we seeing?
We're seeing time management, 18%, facilitating effectively, 43%, participating effectively, 44%, staying on task, focused, 30%, getting a clear decision making, 29%.
Great. Okay, so these are all common challenges that a lot of us are experiencing, and it seems that the majority of people are struggling with actually facilitating these virtual meetings and participating in them. And so I'm really glad that all of you have decided to make time for this today. I would say that, so 30% of you said that focus was a little bit of a challenge. And so I want to show a brief video to you. The audio is not going to launch, but what you will see is what's actually happening. So let's see if I can get this to launch for you. You can take a look. Hopefully behind the mute button, some of you are laughing. Some of you may have seen this before. For those of you who don't know, this actually came out pre-COVID-19, and it made headlines across the internet. So this has become many of our new normal for now. There are numerous distractions, right? This is one that showed up, and today we often have these kinds of experiences, including myself. I had my 5-year-old show up in a princess dress for a virtual meeting the other day where I was sharing video. So other distractions, other common challenges that we're all dealing with right now. I'll give you a moment to just skim some of these up on the screen. These are some of the most common ones. And while we won't be able to cover countermeasures to all of these, we will share some approaches to manage the challenges that are highlighted in the blue stickies. All right, so virtual meetings can help us stay better connected. And right now, we do run the risk of disconnecting. Some of us may be busier than others, whereas some of us may be checking out. So it's easy to do so when we have lots of new challenges on our plates. I hope that this session will give you some insights into overcoming these challenges. So let's dive in. Actually, before we go any further, I want to actually offer a nuance. There is a difference between presentations and virtual meetings, and the purpose is generally different, right? So presentations often have a one-way communication. A presentation might be going out to a lot of different people, whereas the virtual meeting is more interactive. Those who attend a virtual meeting are expected to participate by sharing information or contributing to decision-making. So please keep this in mind when you're considering who needs to attend these types of meetings. So I'm gonna offer a quick piece of section on preparing for the meeting. Sorry, I'm pausing because I'm getting feedback that I'm a little bit choppy, so I'm hoping that that will reconcile itself. So preparing for a virtual meeting is in large part really quite similar to typical good meeting preparation habits. So a lot of this may not be earth-shattering, but it is some good reminders and perhaps these behaviors are in some way even more important to apply for virtual meetings than your in-person meetings. So firstly, you need to start with communicating your purpose. People process information differently. People can jump into a meeting, react what's being shared, and respond on the spot, whereas others need time to digest information and think about information ahead of time. And your presentation will make an impact on how people feel about entering the meeting if you share the purpose. And that's a really important thing for their comfort levels coming into the meeting. I'll tell you a little story. I recently led a meeting in which I sent out what I thought was good meeting preparation. I sent out the purpose, the agenda, the desired outcomes, and what I thought I expected from meeting participants. But what I didn't do was think about each individual attending the meeting and what their unique needs were. And one person jumped right into the meeting and was ready to hit the ground running, whereas another hadn't really had time to digest the meeting materials, nor did this person understand the purpose in full. And so I wish I had anticipated this person's needs to deeply understand the purpose in order to contribute effectively to the meeting. I wish I had reached out ahead of time to confirm his understanding. This sort of hiccup ultimately derailed the conversation initially and made it challenging for him to contribute early in our session in a meaningful way. It also left him feeling really frustrated. So it was a good reminder to me to be really, really clear and explicit about the purpose. Here are some really tangible phrases that you could use. We are meeting because. The purpose of this meeting is. This is important because. By the end of this meeting, I hope we will, right? It's so simple and so obvious, but how many times have you either sent a meeting request or received a meeting request for a virtual meeting without these powerful words? So you might just be thinking, okay, well, I include the meeting topic in a meeting invitation subject line, or we have this meeting every week. Everyone knows the purpose or should know the purpose. But grounding yourselves in this, in the meeting preparation and being really explicit and overly communicative during these virtual times can make a really big difference. So I'd encourage you all to not underestimate the importance of being really explicit in these communications. Secondly, communicate a solid agenda. You don't have the luxury of seeing each other face to face and making easy, quick adjustments on the fly. So the agenda coming up front gives you the opportunity to communicate this, right? Alex is going to talk about this and the importance of managing your time. 18% of you said that time management was important. So this is a tool to really help you in virtual meetings. An agenda could be as simple as some bullets in a sequence for small, familiar meetings, or it may be as robust as having dedicated minutes for each topic, who's responsible for what portion of the agenda, desired outcomes, and how each item on the agenda connects to the overall purpose. So the agenda will depend on your meeting. It'll depend on the formality or the informality of your culture. It'll depend on the people attending the meeting and their typical behaviors, as well as the amount of time you have. So, but regardless of these attributes, it's always important to send an agenda ahead of time, right? It's something that can make a really big difference. All right, moving on to the next thing, reading materials. I don't know about you guys, but I have to say there have been moments when I have received information 5 minutes or maybe an hour before a meeting. And I know that things are dynamic and change often, and that oftentimes these receiving pieces of information ahead of time are reflective of how busy we can all be. But it's also extremely important to send reading materials early enough so that people have time to digest what it is they need to in order to contribute in a meaningful way. So you want to get that information out with adequate time so that people can receive it, think about it, and feel good about coming to the meeting, feeling good about coming to a virtual meeting. Be it sending out a work order list or sending out some information about a design review. Whatever it is, you need to make sure that that comes with enough time for different people's work styles to respond to it. Okay, who to invite? This next one is an important one and potentially something counterintuitive if you have the type of culture where it's important to be very inclusive. In a virtual meeting, you want to invite people who are either going to provide information that will help you move the purpose forward or make decisions during the meeting, right? This is the difference between presentations and a virtual meeting. So often we invite more people than necessary, and it can end up being a waste of people's time, or it can potentially derail the conversation from the topic. So be really thoughtful about who you are actually inviting and think about why they are being invited to that meeting. Next, if you can, prepare the use of video. Alex is going to talk about this in a little bit more depth, but I will just say that in the meeting preparation, test your equipment and connectivity ahead of time. It's important. I've been in a weekly meeting with some of my colleagues recently, and one of them wasn't able to use video, and the reason was there were technical issues. So if you can, if you are the meeting organizer, work one-on-one with those people that are struggling with the different use of technology. And lastly, if you can, establish rules for the meeting ahead of time. Do you have a facilitator? Do you have a timekeeper? Do you have a note taker? While you may not need this for every single meeting, it's a good idea to consider these things ahead of time, particularly for larger meetings, right, that are going to cover a lot of topics. So consider who is playing each of these roles as well, because they do require a unique set of skills. There is good note-taking and terrible note-taking. So you want to make sure that you are ensuring that the right people have the right skills to perform the right roles on these virtual meetings. Note-taking could be a laundry list of items, right? It could be, things that you, like a punch list, or it could be organized with color coding and organized topics and just the right amount of information for the audience to receive. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to my colleague, Alex. Alex, are you there?
Yes, hello. Hello, everyone. Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Great. That's the poll, Billy. Thank you. Let's see what the response is to this poll.
We'll just give it a few more seconds till about 50% of the people have been able to vote.
Great. Thanks, Billy.
Okay, we're going to close the poll. We're going to share it. Starting and end on time, 25%. Not getting high level of engagement, 57%. Having the meeting go down rabbit holes, 37%. Achieving the meeting purpose, 20%. Staying on agenda, 29%.
Great. Thank you so much. I will admit I have encountered every one of those, and I've probably caused at some meeting every one of those. So let's reflect on this. Thank you for the feedback. Let's go to the next slide. Great, thank you. Look, I think let's admit a couple of things. So some of the things I have learned is that this remote work and meeting remotely is tough. It's challenging for me, and when the teams I'm talking to and the work I'm doing, teams are finding it pretty challenging. We haven't learned yet how to have a relaxed conversation. We're not having the same dialogue as we used to. So let's just admit that this is new turf for a lot of us. And I think that acknowledgement helps us move ahead. But at the same time, we're all trying to get the work done, right? So, and I think the feedback was like staying on task, going down rabbit holes was a challenge. And that's true in any meeting. But now with this virtual environment, it's much more difficult. And that's why this facilitating the meeting is so important. A virtual call needs that much more facilitation just because we're in new routines, we're in a new way of working. Our old habits don't work anymore. So first, I would say the first message is spend some extra attention and time to just thinking about how the meeting's going to be facilitated, and especially the leaders and facilitators calling the meeting need to spend some time preparing for it. The first thing I would say is, in terms of preparing for this, is just show up early, right? I can't tell you how many meetings I've been in where it takes 5 or 10 minutes before we actually start the discussion. It really helps if the facilitator shows up early, tests the technology, make sure we have the right attachments open, etc., just to get the meeting started on time. So it's respectful of people's time, and it also gets the discussion going more robustly. So that's the first thing I'll say. So let's move to the next slide. So the next thing I would talk about is really, look, we are in this new way of connecting. And I know we use the word meeting, but it's really connection. Right? It's really about us connecting to each other as human beings. The old way of chatting, the one-on-one conversation, the informal stuff, is kind of disappeared in this new way of working. So what happens, right? The only time we actually talk is during these virtual meetings. But there's the sense that these virtual meetings are pretty formal and transactional, so we have to change that. And the way to do it is one tip is to just have this water cooler chat right up in the beginning. I'll give you an example. The maintenance manager that I'm working with in the past would have his daily check-in with his crew, but most of the really good stuff happened after his daily check-in, right? That's when the person would come up and say, hey, you know, that water cooler part that we are waiting on might be delayed a week, so we may not be able to take it down this week. We may have to wait an extra week, right? Just a heads up. That kind of discussion, that informal chat, making it safe and having the chat doesn't exist in a formal virtual meeting environment. So to avoid that and give people a chance to just chat and connect, have this water cooler moment. Just talk about the environment, talk about personal challenges that people may be having, and talk about things that we should celebrate. So just make it an interactive moment. So I think the mental model I would say is take it from a time to meet to a time to connect. The next thing is to create a safe space, right? Look, I think as a facilitator, what you want to do is create a safe space and a tone of optimism and transparency for the team. Everybody is being disrupted at this point, right? Even if your work is going along as normal, you have a family that you're worried about, you have your social structure that you're worried about. We're all impacted. So just acknowledge that and go forward with that. The second piece I would say is that, look, the number one psychological need we all have right now is to know that our boss has our back, right? Does my boss have my back? And is he looking out, or is he or she looking out for me? Is a real big need at this point with all this disruption. And with the remote work, when we don't connect with each other that much, that is kind of lost. So set the pace, set the tone for the meeting, and the facilitator and the leader has a unique power to do that. So please do that as you start your meeting. Many of us have our own many of us have our rules of engagement as teams. So what you're seeing on the screen right now is really an example, right? And now everybody has a different set of behaviors that they're pushing forward, different working norms. So this is just an example of what one company uses. But again, you have your own. So take a moment at the start of your meeting to reinforce the behaviors you want to see in your team, especially when it's a virtual setting, because sometimes we just forget. So it's always good to remember to reinforce this right up in the beginning. And making it safe for people to talk about is super important at this point. So, next slide. Video conferencing. Okay, this is pretty controversial, right? So we're all different. Some of us like video conferencing, some of us don't. But video conferencing has its pluses, right? The biggest benefit of video conferencing is that the fact that we can see each other, we can see the passion behind people's statements, you can see the body language, you can see where they're coming from, and you can connect much more as a human being when you have the video conferencing turned on, right? But let's also understand there's some resistance here to video conferencing. It's stressful, right? You're in the spotlight when you're on a video conference. You kind of like feel like, oh, people are looking at me. So you have to so people are aware of that. Second thing is when you're on video conference, you have to pay attention, right? You have to pay attention to what other people are saying. And some people are just uncomfortable with the appearance of how they may look on the camera, etc. So I think there's a lot of reasons why people don't turn on the videos. But my experience has been working with clients is once they get in the habit of turning on the videos and get comfortable with it, it takes a couple of tries. The conversation, the discussion is that much richer. You're able to connect. You're able to see each other. And you get over the fact that you have, laundry behind you that's showing up and those kind of things. And just, I think being able to connect as human beings is much more powerful when you have the video conference turned on. And this is true even with one-on-one conversations. A lot of us are using FaceTime, etc., with our family members. So it's the same situation, right? Just connect as human beings, connect as a team, and video conferencing absolutely helps towards that. Okay. This slide talks about one of the things is we're all on this journey. We're all trying to get better. Video conferencing, virtual team, remote team meetings is all new stuff for us. One good practice for good hygiene in this regard is to just reflect at the end of the meeting and take stock. What went well? What didn't go well? Here's a couple of tools that people use. Just a simple reflection checklist at the end of the meeting. Did we actually meet the purpose? Did we multitask? Or were we in good behavior, etc.? Those kind of checks will help the team reflect on what's working, what's not, and where to focus, and really make an improvement for the next meeting. None of us are perfect on day one. So as we keep trying this and learning new techniques, we'll get better. And you can see there's another tool there, plus Delta. It's the same intent, but this is just another tool to get to the same purpose, which is understanding how to get better on these meetings. The last I would talk about as a facilitator is, and I think that was on the survey's time management. Like the facilitators and leaders of these meetings have a specific purpose in terms of, have a special power in terms of time management. They can make the call on where to keep going and where to change topics. So use that power, use that authority to make sure that the meeting stays on track. You want to capture things on that. If you get into a deep dive on a rabbit hole was discussed. One thing about rabbit holes is it always happens. People are passionate about certain topics, but one technique is to just have a parking lot or a place where you can capture these ideas and say, let's discuss it later at a different point. And the purpose of this meeting is this is a great topic to talk about. Let's do it at a different time. So you have to manage the time. If you go down a rabbit hole, you have two choices, right? You can, if it's a relevant topic and it's actually meaningful to have the discussion, you can choose to say, okay, let's talk about this and keep going and change the agenda. Now, however, if you do this, just make it a conscious decision. That's all I'm asking. Just make it a conscious decision. So the facilitator tells the team, hey, okay, guys, we're going to stop talking about A. We're going to go to B. Let's talk about this for the next 15 minutes. Then we'll come back and cover as much ground as we can. So that works really well. but it always helps the team when you're transparent about it, because some team members will be wondering, why are we talking about this so much, and not be able to voice that. And the same thing in terms of managing time towards the end. If you find that you're running out of time and you want to extend the meeting out, please ask for permission, right? As a facilitator, people have other agendas, other meetings to go to. So about 5 or 10 minutes to the end, if you feel like you're going to run into, you're going to go over time, just ask the team for their permission to go over, and respect those who cannot stay on. Okay.
Great. Thanks, Alex. Really valuable facilitation tips. We're now going to shift gears into participation in virtual meetings. So, Billy, can you help us out with the launch of the poll?
It has now launched.
Great. And what are we seeing?
And we are seeing 61% staying present and focused on the meeting, avoiding distractions, understanding my role, 17%, speaking or being heard during the meeting, 46%, knowing your contributions are received by others, 46%, feeling prepared, 14%.
Great. That's really great feedback. Thank you, everyone who chimed into that poll. We're going to spend some time talking about this. And, you know, this is really consistent with what I think I've heard from others that I've worked with, other teams and facilities. And so it's nice to know that there is some consistency. 43% of you at the beginning said that your biggest challenge was related to participating in meetings. So we're going to spend the next few minutes on this topic. So distractions, right? Being present, 61% of you said this is a challenge for us. So, and it's so easy, right? It's so easy to get distracted, particularly right now. So I think I covered some of this when we talked about meeting preparation, but there are things within your control and there are things that are out of your control. You can't control your kids, your pets, your roommates, your family members, your spouses, right? But you can control other aspects of distractions coming into your world. If you can, close your email during these virtual meetings. Make a conscious choice to, and make it known during those rules of engagement, right? To ask people to please be present. At the beginning of this webinar, we said, hey, please stay with us for these next 60 minutes. It's okay to ask people to do the same in your virtual meetings. If you can, put your phone face down and your notifications off. Eliminate the background noise as much as possible. And this is why the video component is so important, right? You want to actually be seen and stay present. If your video is on, you are actually showing that you physically need to be more accountable to being present in the meeting. It was interesting. I was recently in a video meeting where one participant picked up his phone and started looking at it during the meeting. And I think he'd forgotten that he was on video. And so it was really obvious to others that we'd lost him, and we had to quickly consider, gosh, why are we losing him? And how do we re-engage him? And so we can do this by, as participants, holding one another accountable by saying, hey, Joe, what did you think of X, right? Or, hey, so let's stick with this topic together as we move on to the next thing, right? So be authentic and call out people so that not in a reprimanding kind of way, but in a way that is going to say, hey, your voice matters here. It's really important to the conversation that you participate, okay? And with these rules of engagement, it's really important that you actually not just rely on the facilitator for holding the meeting together with those rules, right? You might actually seek validation from each participant to say, hey, are you on board with these? Is there anything you want to change before we get started? So you want to make sure that you ask people to, as a participant, ask one another, hey, what do you think, right? And it can be informal or it can be formal. So you can review rules formally and see them as a participant, or really informally and just listen. But having them up front make a really big difference. So here's a big one. Don't use your mute button. I have been guilty of this. I have easily turned on my mute button unless there's a moment when I actually want to chime in on something. But here's the thing. When you are running a virtual meeting with a group of people who are either decision makers or contributing information to the conversation to help you achieve your purpose, it's really important to keep your mute button off. People get that there are going to be distractions, right? There might be a dog barking. There might be a cat yelling in the background. My cat might come into this room any moment as I am sharing this with you from home. So it's really important to keep your mute button off. I understand also that you might not want to be in the limelight, right? It does feel a little bit like you are on the spot when you're not using your mute button in a virtual meeting. But please know that this is one way to enhance engagement in a way that is really meaningful. And so many of you said that this was something that you wanted to focus on. 57% of you said you needed more engagement. This is one way to do it. So here's another tip for participation. Use the technology.
Meredith, I hate to interrupt you, but we're still seeing the poll. Could you click on your screen?
Oh, geez, I am so sorry. How's that?
That's okay.
Is it sharing now?
Yep. No, we're still seeing the poll.
Let's try again. Is it coming up now?
No, unfortunately, it's still showing the poll.
Okay, I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and I'm going to share again.
There you go.
Yeah,
perfect. Thank you so much.
No, thank you for letting me know, Billy. And are you seeing the correct screen with the
Yes.
virtual meeting, participate in the meeting? Okay.
Yes, we are. You're good.
So even in the best of times, right, the use of technology can get in our way. So appreciate that. Thank you. So I would just say that with the use of technology, there are lots of tools available to us, right? We're all using different platforms, but there's often a hand raise option. There are emojis. One of the things that you can do with video is ask people if they're video sharing to give you feedback with things like a thumbs up, right, or a thumbs down. So using the technology to your advantage and learning how to use it as a participant is really valuable. So the last thing I'll say as a participant in the meeting, when you are contributing, 46% of you said that you struggled with being heard, right? Or speaking, chiming in. So if you are questioning whether or not you are being heard, I would say that it is really so important in virtual meetings to ask for explicit feedback. Does what I said just make sense? Do you agree with me? Does anyone disagree? Does anyone have any questions about what I just shared? What comments do you have? We can't read people's body language right now, so these virtual meetings need to have more verbal feedback than one would normally get. Lastly, and this is related to being heard and speaking up, is this concept of stepping up or stepping back. Here's what this means. You want to think about when you're entering a meeting as a participant. Am I normally a step up kind of person? Meaning, am I eager to contribute and talk a lot? Or am I more of a step back kind of person? I'm going to sit and listen. I might use the mute button. I am not so excited about contributing, right? It feels uncomfortable. Virtual meetings can augment these behaviors. And so it's really important to be aware of your own personal tendencies and how you want to contribute to the meeting. So if you were invited, know why you were invited and know that you are invited with a seat at the virtual table. So you want to try to use the time wisely. I was recently in a meeting with a lot of people and they were really enthusiastic. And there were 4 people who were constantly stepping up, and it was really hard for others to chime in. And because we were all virtual, we actually couldn't see one another's body language when others were trying to contribute. So it's really important to practice this sort of self-awareness and be sensitive to it. And at the same time, be forgiving of one another. This is because it's such a sensitive time, we are likely to augment our behaviors in general. And so be mindful of that and forgiving.
Oh, thanks, Meredith. So why are we talking about this right now, right? So I think we all are facing disruption. Right? There are new routines, there's lack of visibility. There are some unique challenges with working remotely. There's this sense of tunnel vision, where the work that's in front of me is what is most important, and I'm going to do it, right? And we lose sight of the changes and what the goal and the mission of the team is sometimes. So you get into this, let me get my work done movement. You also have leaders who are distracted, right? Leaders are dealing with the disruption, attending many, many meetings, and there's lots of changes. I was working with a team where on Monday, they were getting ready to mothball a building, send people home, and planning for reduced work hours. By Friday, it was, let's reoccupy this building, work extra hours, and figure out how we can put in new extra cleaning stations and spacing people apart, etc. So there's a lot of change happening, right? Which means communication is so important at this time, right? Our facility leaders, etc., are reacting to our regions and everybody else with changing demands, and it changes every day. And what gets lost sometimes is the fact that it's the communication to our teams, right? Before we used to have the chit chat. Now, sometimes we lose that. And when you don't have good, clear communication, assumptions can take the space or the spot of good facts, right? So I think I would just stress that communication is really what we're talking about here. Virtual team meetings is the way to do it. And again, I will stress that it's about connecting, not about the meeting itself, right? The other challenge we have is the isolation, where people are doing the work that they think is important or doing it from home, but they can feel isolated. They can feel disconnected from what's going on. I'll give you an example. Transparent calendars. Right? Transparent calendars is a fantastic thing. We want calendars of our leaders to be transparent so people can see where the priorities are and where he or she is spending time on. But there's always, people are human beings, right? So I can see my boss's calendar. I have this example where this person looks at the calendar and notices that the manager is spending 4 times the amount of time with a peer versus herself, and immediately starts getting the fear that, hey, there's something going on. There's some dynamic here going on that I'm not aware of. Why is this person spending more time with her than me? And that creates its own disruption and worry, right? So I think it's about being transparent, communicating well, and good virtual team meetings help you do that. It's all about, in a virtual work environment, we're trying to reinforce trust so that people can take the work that they need to do and do it well with confidence. That, again, I'll stress this again, with confidence that the boss has their back and the institution has their back. So just keep that in mind. That's really what we're trying to drive towards. So let's move on to the next slide. This is, I know it's tough. However, if we do it well, working from home or working remotely and having these virtual team meetings can actually be productive. There are some challenges, of course, but it can actually work. And I'll give you some examples on how you need the structure, but it can work well when you communicate well, like I just talked about. When you have good structure, right? So because we don't have the daily check-ins anymore, sometimes the standard structure we used to have in the past is lost. So make sure we have the right structure on these virtual meetings. How often do you want to meet? What are you going to talk about? What are the visuals you're going to use? What are the metrics you want to track? Those kind of things. We talked about rules, having clear rules and expected behaviors that Meredith just talked about. The other aspect of this is skills, right? Yes, it's intuitive to get onto virtual team meetings and just do it, but it takes real skill, a new set of skills to actually do it well. So understand the skills and tools you want to develop and go after those. And the last but not least is supportive leadership, right? It comes back to, I want to be heard. We heard that in the survey. I want to be heard. So it's much more important for the leaders to be very transparent and find new ways to support their team members, right? And this starts with these virtual meetings where you can have a real open dialogue on what's going on. So that's why this is super important at this point. Thank you.
And before
Billy,
we go to Q&A, Billy, I just wanted to share one thing. For those of you who are wondering, we actually do have a quick reference guide to the content that was covered today that is going to be made available to you and possibly emailed out afterwards.
Thanks, Meredith. Billy, are there any questions that popped up on the chat?
Oh, yes. We have quite a few questions coming in, and if we don't get time to answer all of these, we will get the questions to you, an answer to your question by one of our presenters. The first question is, someone was asking, could you define what rabbit hole means?
Meredith, do you want to take that?
Sure, absolutely. So rabbit hole is when you end up going off on a tangent in a conversation. So if your meeting purpose is to discuss a certain work order that has come in, right, or a work scope for the day, and someone else wants to talk about how the administration is changing a policy, and the conversation digresses in that direction, that's a rabbit hole. And really, Alex mentioned the word parking lot and talked about how, you know, you want to capture those things that are important to participants. That policy may be incredibly relevant, but it might not be relevant to the topic of the virtual meeting. And so try to avoid those rabbit holes, but also honor what people are thinking about and capture them so that you can take them offline and talk about them at another time.
Thank you. Next question. I think you did. She'll let me know. Any questions how to tactfully help your manager run more effective meetings?
Sure, absolutely. Go ahead, Alex.
Let me chime in and then add on, Meredith. So how to let your manager know how to run effective meetings? Great question. I think what I'm reading from that is that the meetings you're attending may not be quite what you want. So I think it's always good to have a standard, right? It's always good to understand the possibility and the potential of what can happen. I think we all attend several different virtual meetings. So sharing, hey, I went to this one, this technique worked really well with your manager. If I'm assuming they're willing to listen, is always a good path. The other thing I would recommend is doing that end of meeting checklist, right? Having the team discussion on how did we do as a team in this virtual session? Did it work? Did we meet our intent? Were we able to have the right dialogue? Having the reflection point really helps make improvement as a team. That way the pressure's not, you're responding as a team and it's not, trying to give feedback to one person. Meredith?
Yeah, I would just say that if you're the person who's wondering, gosh, how do I help my manager run a more effective meeting, I would add to what Alex just said, potentially go to your manager and say, hey, I have this idea. Can we just spend 5 minutes at the end of each of our meetings and ask the group collectively, hey, what do you think went really well? And what do you think could have gone differently? And building that sense of practice around that feedback loop, I think will really help people, especially if you bring it to the next meeting, the subsequent meeting.
Okay, thank you. What suggestions do you have for virtual meetings that occur all day, such as a board meeting?
Great question. Well, I've got a couple thoughts, and I suspect Alex might also. So I would say breaks. Take breaks. People cannot be in a virtual meeting for long periods of time without stretching their legs, getting some water. And it's especially if you want people to be as engaged as they are in in-person meetings, make sure that you take those breaks. And I would say that you shouldn't let more than an hour and a half go by without taking taking a 5-minute. Alex, go ahead.
Great point. I think breaks are the number one thing. I think having a routine and respecting people's times, right? Before this virtual world, right, we had routines. We would have time hours or work hours, so to say. But now it seems to be you get up in the morning and you're in a meeting immediately, and it doesn't end till the middle of the night or something. So I think establishing routines and having a culture where you respect people's personal time is super important. That's the first thing. 2 is absolutely having those breaks. I think the recommendation is at least every hour you want to get up for a few minutes. And one trick is to try to end these meetings early. If you can end these meetings 5 minutes to the hour or 5 minutes before the end time, it gives people a chance to get that bio break, a chance to run and stretch and do things like that before the next meeting. So just set the expectation that we try to end on time and put it on the agenda, put it on the calendar, right? Put the water cooler chatter on the agenda, put stretch time on the agenda, put the expectation that we'll end 5 minutes as a behavior norm to shoot for, and hopefully you'll get better over time.
Thank you. Next question. I have a hard time keeping my meeting from running over. One person will take too much time, and it sometimes does not allow others a chance to speak. What should I do?
Great question. So meetings running over can happen for a variety of reasons. And in this case, it sounds like there might be 1 or 2 dominant people, right? So as a facilitator, one of the things that you can do is actually explicitly call on others to participate. So let's just say that Joe tends to speak a lot. So when you are talking about something, make sure that you're asking, hey, Chris, what do you think? Hey, Jenny, what do you think? And so don't be afraid to call on people to engage others in the conversation. Also, don't be afraid to set the upfront ground rule of, hey, we're not going to get to perfection on all of these topics that we're covering today. We're going to get to good enough so that we can move on and move forward. And so I think that it's largely about setting expectations at the front end. The other thing you can do is make visible where you are in your agenda. So if you're talking through a virtual meeting and you are sharing screens, cross things off your agenda on your computer as you're going through them so that people can see, oh geez, we're 3/4 of the way through our time and we've only gotten through the first quarter of the topics for today. And then as a facilitator, I would just caution you to potentially try to keep fewer topics in a meeting. I think that oftentimes people try to cram too much into a given period of time and not allow for the adequate conversation that needs to take place. So you might need to scale back how much you're going to cover. Alex, do you have anything to add?
So the one thing I would add is I think that's why it's so important to have a facilitator role in your meeting, right? So there's actually a role, and that gives you that political authority to make that call. Like, hey, we've talked about this. Here's where we are on the agenda. You have a choice, continue this or move on to the next topic. The other only comment I would add is let's make sure that person who may be very passionate about the topic and the topic may be very relevant has a chance to talk about that outside of the meeting. So maybe in a one-on-one or some other setting, but making sure that voice is heard. Maybe it's a very important voice. All our voices are important. So making sure there's avenue for the person to express their feelings is also important. So just give that alternate means. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Next question. Please expand on the no mute suggestion. Why and what are the benefits? All other virtual meeting how-tos I have seen suggest keeping yourself on mute unless you're speaking. My experience also would support this, as it vastly reduces background noise. I'm curious about what you think.
Absolutely. So it's a really good question, and I would offer a couple of thoughts. One is that I do think there's a difference between a virtual meeting in which you are actively contributing and participating and a presentation. So if you are largely listening, then a mute button might be very appropriate. If you are expected to contribute your thoughts or information or decisions, it's important to stay off mute. And here's why. I think that during this time, when we are all in this very unique circumstance and many of us are working virtually, the noise behind us is forgivable, right? I just had my cat walk into our meeting and I thought, oh gosh, I hope that that doesn't come across on the audio. Other people have other distractions all around them, but I think that the benefit of being present and focused and being heard and being engaged all outweigh those potentially minor noises. Now, if your fire alarm goes off, yes, please turn on your mute button, right? But if you have sort of the day-to-day, not using the mute button actually forces you to lean into the meeting.
Okay, thank you. I have a very interesting question here for you. What is your opinion on virtual backgrounds?
I would say make it interesting. So I think there is a sense of personal connectedness you get when you don't share the background. So you get a view of my home, my living room, or my library, or whatever it is, that you can get a sense, and you get an insight into my personal life, right? You can see that I have a picture of something that's interesting, or I have a drum set or something else. So I think I like it when we don't have the background. But I think that's a personal preference. So that's my opinion. I think it's largely based on personal preference, but personally, what I found, I find it much richer when people are talking from their homes, especially when it's a house. I would love no background. Meredith?
Oh yeah, Alex, I think that that's right on. And then the only thing I would add is that in some of the meetings that I've had recently with some folks in capital programs, they've actually loaded up their favorite vacation photo as their background, and that's been kind of cool because we've had conversations that are those water cooler conversations, right? You're getting to know people on a more personal level, and I think that's the idea, right? If you use a background or don't use a background, it's a time when we are all getting to know each other in a slightly different way.
Okay, thank you. Is recording a meeting typical?
So we have done it. It's done quite often. These are meetings, especially when it's a presentation or a learning event. I usually have not used or seen meetings being recorded when it's just a discussion or a decision-making meeting. It's one or more. I've seen it more used when it's a learning event or somebody's doing a presentation or there is a tutorial of sorts that's going on.
Alex, what sounds like to me is you're offering examples of really eliminating the purpose. So if the purpose is for learning, then it might make sense to record. If the purpose is for something else, it might not make sense to record. In our world, we ask permission. Hey, is it okay if we record this? Or we might say, hey, we'd like to record this because these 3 people are not able to join us, and it's important that they hear the conversation that has transpired.
Okay, well, we are now at the top of the hour. We haven't been able to answer all of our questions. So the people whose questions we haven't answered, you'll get a response directly from our presenters today. I want to thank everyone for taking time from their busy schedules to attend today. Alex, Meredith, thank you much for a very informative presentation today. I hope everyone has a great day. Be safe and stay healthy. Thank you so much. Bye-bye now.